So the mediation process, I want to start by just saying that mediation is one of the types of third-party interventions, which we talked about last week. And we saw that there's an intervention called coaching, then there's mediation, there's arbitration, there's litigation, and they each have a different approach, but they're all ways to try to help people resolve conflicts peacefully without violence, okay? So we saw that in negotiation, people control the process and the outcomes, but sometimes people are not equally skilled, or they're too emotionally charged to be able to do it effectively, or there's not a power balance, so it doesn't work, right? And that's when we move into these two modes to try to empower the disputants, okay? So mediation is our topic for today. And in this, the mediators will control the process, but the disputants will control the decisions that come out of it. So if we move here to the diagram that I had for it, you see that in negotiation, the two participants are talking to each other, okay? And in mediation, the mediator is underneath because they're supporting this process of continuing that conversation, but they're trying to create recognition and empowerment so that each person can fully express themselves, and also to try to create understanding between the two parties that they weren't getting when they were trying to negotiate by themselves. So that's the goal of mediation. And I'm going to be going over then the steps or the stages that are used for this to happen and be effective. All right, so here we are with the first, which is the setup. Okay, so this is what you're going to have to do for your first assignment. So listen carefully, take notes, and you might even be able to do this assignment tonight and just have it done, okay? So before I go into this, let me just talk a little bit about how people get into mediation. It's not as widely known. If we had a TV show like LA Mediation, like we had LA Law, or some of these other shows about litigation, or even cop shows, if we had a show on mediation, which I guarantee you could be just as dramatic as a show with litigation, more and more people would know about it, and more people would choose it as an option. But unfortunately, it's not as widely known or even understood in our society. People don't know what it is, okay? So with that as the reality, the way that people come to mediation a lot of times is because they went to court and the judge told them to go to mediation. With divorce, if there's child custody, then people are ordered by the judge to go to mediation before the judge is going to make a decision. So if they come up with a decision in mediation, the judge is just going to say, okay, you're going to do what you said in your mediation, and then it becomes legally binding, okay? If they go to mediation, they can't come up with a decision, then the judge is going to make a decision. So it's really to your benefit if you could come up with a decision in mediation when you have child custody. Another way that people might end up in mediation is that one of the parties that are having the conflict knows about it and talks to a mediator, and then the mediator or the mediation organization contacts the other person and then tries to encourage them to come to mediation, and then they will both end up there, okay? Ideally, both people know about it, and then they both research and try to find a mediator that they're both comfortable with, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't know about it. Some people get referred to a mediator by someone they know, just like Nicole got referred to a lawyer. Imagine if she got referred to a mediator instead of a lawyer. It could have had a whole different movie there, right? So that's how a lot of times how people find out about it. There's been a very strong movement in education, conflict resolution education, where mediation has been brought into schools, and that was part of my career, was training professionals in schools to do mediation, to run mediation programs, to set them up. I train people in how to mediate, how to run conflict resolution curriculum for kids in their classrooms. If kids are fighting in schools, they might get referred to a mediator. And they have kids that do mediation in schools from third grade up until seniors in high school. And that is the youngest that can do mediation is third grade. Younger than that, they can't do it, but they can have other people mediate for them when they're little. So you could have a sixth grader mediate for kindergartners or first graders. Okay. So those are some of the things. In the workplace, people typically go to HR if they have a dispute, if you have a large organization. And in HR, they could have some people that are trained mediators. Sometimes they will bring in a person on contract to come in and do mediation. And there's also a person called ombuds, which used to be called ombudsman, but they got rid of the man to make it gender equal. So it's called an ombuds person. And those are people that understand all of the different types of conflict resolution. And they'll decide, okay, this is a dispute that we could use mediation for. No, we can't use mediation. We need to do some training because there was some sexual harassment and these people need to understand what it is and stop that behavior. Okay. Or it could be that there's legal issues and they have to talk to a lawyer and do something with lawyers. They can't just do mediation. So there's different things that could happen in an organization, and ombuds people know the full gamut. And they a lot of times they are mediators or they bring in a mediator to handle it. Okay. The other thing is there's something called neighborhood mediation or community mediation. And that was the organization I worked for that has free mediation or very low cost mediation for people in the neighborhood. So if you're having a dispute with a neighbor, you can call up your community mediation and say, hey, I've got a problem with my neighbor. They make too much noise, or their leaves are always falling in the gutters of my house and then blocking up my gutters. And I need them to, take care of their tree, blah, 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 whatever it is. You could go to community mediation. And then the other one that I want to talk about is called VORP, which is Victim Offender Reconciliation Program. And what that is when, and the program I'm going to tell you about is done with young people. Okay. That's when a young person commits a crime and they hurt somebody in the process. So like, say they broke into their neighbor's house and they stole their computer. Okay. They got busted. They got brought up to the police, and the judge says, okay, you have a choice. I'm going to either send you to the juvenile detention facility, or you can go to this victim offender reconciliation program and go to mediation. When they go to mediation, they have to meet with the person that they offended, that they hurt, that they committed a crime against. And they're going to have to sit and listen to that person talk about how they were offended or how they were hurt, like what the costs were to them. They have to listen to that person, and the mediator guides this process. And the person and the young person ends up by the end taking responsibility and coming up with the other person with some form of restitution. Like if it's a senior citizen, they might end up doing chores for them, or taking care of their yard, or they might work and pay them back. So there's ways in which they do that. And what's really cool about those programs is that a lot of times the youth develops a relationship with the person that they hurt, and that actually is a form of rehabilitation. So this young person stops wanting to commit crimes. I am going to post a video for next week about one of these programs. And the one that is here locally is called the Centinela Youth Services. And they're based in Inglewood, but they also have an office in Pacoima. And they, if you are interested in doing that, it's a great way to learn how to mediate. It's very meaningful. In addition to doing the victim offender reconciliation mediation, they also do mediations for kids who are having problems with their parents. And they also do mediations, I think, for kids when they're having problems with their teachers or other people. So they do a whole range of mediations to help youth in communities, and that helps to keep kids out of jail. And it's tremendously effective. When you watch this video, you're going to see just how effective it is. It's pretty amazing. All right. So if you were interested, you could volunteer, become a mediator for them. They would have you do more training. And it doesn't matter that you took this class. Taking this class means that you're going to be better at it. But I volunteered for them and I had to do the training, and I've been teaching mediation for almost 30 years, and they still made me do the training because every mediation program has their own approach. And I teach a very specific type of approach, and that I know is effective. The agreement rate for my approach was 90%. So an agreement rate is something that individual mediators or mediation services or organizations, they keep track of the numbers of agreements. So you have a two columns, right? You have agreement, no agreement, and you keep track, and you have an ongoing tally. So my organization had a 90% agreement rate. So 90% of the time, 9 out of 10 people that came to our mediation would walk out of there with an agreement. Okay. The other, 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100, no, 90%. Yeah. 1 out of 10 didn't get an agreement, but 9 out of 10 times people have an agreement by the end. Okay. So, me personally, I have a 100% agreement rate using this process. So that's why I'm so committed to this process. I've just seen it work every time with some of the most horrible people. And they're horrible because they're upset. By the end of the mediation, they're not horrible people anymore. Okay. So I really believe in this process. I really think it works and it works well. All right. So now you know how people get to mediation. They could get referred or they know about it. They Google it, they find it, they get there. Okay. So now they've gotten there, and this is what you need to do to start the mediation. Okay. So I have set up these slides into 3 columns for the 3 different um, sort of objectives. So this is the objective for the whole mediation stage. This is what the mediator is trying to do, and this is what you want the disputant to do. Okay. So in the very beginning, what you're trying to do is create a positive environment so people are trusting and they want to talk, and they participate and they're cooperative. So the mediator, what you do is you have to compose yourself. Now, a lot of people go to mediation when they're doing other things during the day, and they have to stop and go do a mediation. You might have another job. If this is a part of your job, you might be doing some other things. Some people that do volunteer mediation do it after work. So you have to clear your head of other things and find yourself centered so you can really focus. Okay. So that's the first job, is compose yourself and just get focused on the people in the room. You have to greet the disputants. And when you do that, you want them to feel welcome and you appreciate their being there. Okay. The next thing is to take care of logistics. So here it says, that you want to tell people where there's restrooms, soda or water, whatever you're providing. Some people have coffee or tea, and a phone. I probably should take this off because nowadays everyone has a cell phone, but sometimes, people might need a phone for emergency. And then, what's missing here is tissues. I always have tissues because people cry in mediation. By having them there, people know it's normal and you don't have to run out of the room and go find a tissue. Okay. So have tissues. And then if we are doing a mediation in a specific location with everyone in the same room, we seat the disputants, but we're going to do ours on Zoom. And nowadays there's a lot of mediation happening on Zoom, so you don't have to seat them, but pretend you're seating them. And I like to have them facing the mediator in the beginning. So that's what I do. I sit on one side, they sit on the other side. And I like to use a table because I like to write. Some people don't like tables because they feel like it's a symbol of a barrier. So that's a philosophical choice that you get to make if you do mediation in a room. But I always have a table and I kind of write on it, and it feels formal and it's safe and so on. Okay. What you want is just for the disputes to feel oriented and comfortable. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the setup? Because that's what you're going to do the first assignment on. And as you can see, it's pretty short. It's not a lot of work. Anyone have any questions on the setup? Okay. And you can always go back and watch my video to see what I did, to see how it's done. Okay. All right. So we're moving then into the stage 1 of the mediation, which actually gets the mediation going now. And we continue with want to keep a positive environment. And then also we want to develop trust in the mediators and the process itself, so they have faith that this can work. All right. So you welcome everyone again. Can't overly welcome people. Okay. Welcome them. Now you explain the process. So you're going to have to study the slides a little bit to see what the slides are before you can write this up. And then I want you to write this up in your own words. Okay. In my little thumbnail sketch of it is that it's a 3-stage process. We start with the disputants talking to us, explaining the problem so that we can all get a really clear picture of it. Then we have people talk to each other so that they can really come to a clear understanding of each other. And then we have people work on coming up with a solution. So it's a 3-stage process. Those are the 3 steps. And during that time, my role as a mediator is to be neutral, to support everybody, and to guide the process. So I'm like a river raft guide. I'm not a judge or a jury. I'm not a teacher. I am there to support people to have a conversation that's going to move towards a solution. Okay, so that's the role. You can put that in your own words, find your own metaphor. What would that be for you, for someone who guides a conversation? Okay. um, then the confidentiality. It's really important that you let people know that the process is confidential, because that can be a big deal for people. And what I do is tell people that it's confidential, and I take notes during the process. The notes are for me to keep track and to really know what is what their interests and concerns are. So I do it to help me be a better mediator. But at the end of the session, they get shredded. I don't keep them. Okay. And um, and it's important for people to know that, because they don't want they don't want this to become like evidence about something that could be used against them later. Okay. um the I preview the stages, which I just said, the process is about listening and helping people find a solution, and then the stages are, the first stage is talking to the mediator, the second stage is talking to each other, and then the last stage is coming up with a solution with everyone involved in it. Okay. The caucuses. Now, caucuses are an option that I have only used once in my whole 30-year career of a mediator. And there are other people that use it a lot. My organization had a philosophical opposition to using them, because this is what a caucus looks like. You say, okay, we need to take a break. Nicole, I need to talk to you privately. So Charlie, could you just wait here? I want to go talk to Nicole. So then I talk to Nicole and say, wow, you seem to be really upset and we're not getting anywhere with the mediation. What do you need to feel calmer so that we can move on and get this mediation back on track? Okay. So you're trying to cajole the person to be more cooperative and maybe tell you something they're afraid to say in the room. Sometimes they say it to you and you help them figure out how to say it so they can say it in the room. Okay. So that's the purpose of it. The problem with it is that when you do that, then Charlie's sitting there going, I wonder what they're talking about. Or maybe they think you're siding with Nicole because they have no idea what's being said. So that's why I've only ever used it once with someone who was just being so unreasonable and going round and round and round and round, and we were getting nowhere. So I felt like I needed to do it. And then if that didn't work, I was going to end the mediation. But after I did that, the person calmed down and became more cooperative. So we use these very sparingly, and I recommend don't use them if you don't have to. But you tell people that you might have to stop the mediation and then talk to people individually to get more clarity, so they know what that's about, to get better clarity, okay? And to get the process rolling better. Okay, the ground rules are really important. I have just a couple of ground rules, like 3-4 ground rules, and I'm going to share them with you. You have probably experienced other ground rules and other, a lot of you communication majors, so you have ground rules for classes. Some of you in clubs, teams that have ground rules. So here's the ones I use. The first one I use is to say, I need everyone to agree to solve the problem, that we're here to solve the problem. Can you agree to work to solve the problem? Okay, yes. Can you agree to work to problem solve them? Yes. Okay, great. Now we can move on. Okay, second rule, super important, no interrupting. I say no interrupting because it's something people do. When people are mad, they interrupt a lot. So once I say there's no interrupting, then when they interrupt, I can say, hey, remember you said no interrupting. You agreed to not interrupt. You're interrupting. Can you stop and honor your agreement? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. And then if they keep interrupting, I'll do another intervention, but I won't talk about that right now. But if you have that no interrupting, then every time it happens, you can then have that to bring out to try to stop the interrupting and get them to just listen to each other. Okay. It's one that you have to constantly enforce. People that are angry are always interrupting, and frustrated and so on. Okay. So I need that as a ground rule. Some people don't like to say no interrupting because they think that's negative. And so some people might say, I need us to take turns and let each person finish what they have to say before you jump in. Right. But that's more wordy. And that's why I like to just say no interrupting, because it's very clear. We all know what that means. But say it however you want to. But it's a really, really important ground rule. The next one is to tell people to use respectful language. With kids, we say no name calling and put downs. You could say that if you want to, if you think that's clearer. I say, please use respectful language. And if people start using put downs, then I start pointing it out and saying, oh, remember you said to use respectful language. Is there another way to say that where that's more respectful? Okay. So those are the things that you put out, because when people are upset, those are the ground rules they usually violate. And then if you set them, you get to reinforce them. And that's easier to bring people back into being cooperative. Okay. The next thing is to check on time constraints. My mediation program, we had mediations that ran from 2 to 4 hours. That was like what they almost always lasted, 2 to 4 hours. A lot of people schedule a mediation in the middle of the workday and they only have 1 hour. And so you have to have multiple sessions. Some people will schedule 2 hours. And also people can get exhausted doing mediation. So you have to check with the people and see what their time constraints are. And if you're a professional mediator, you'll probably develop different ways of doing it. Like if you do mediations all day, you may be scheduling people for an hour at a time or 2 hours at a time, right? So you need to check with them, and then you think about, well, what are your time constraints as well? Okay. Community mediation programs, they have volunteers there. They come in for the evening. They usually don't have anything else planned for the evening. That's their whole night. So they don't mind staying there for 4 hours. Okay. But a lot of people get tired. And so you can take a break and say, no, I think we're all tired. We need to stop here. So just check in and see, did they plan 1 hour, 2 hour? What did they plan? And then you have to be the one that watches the clock and stops it when you had said it was going to stop. Okay. So that's another thing that you need to do. All right, so that's this process. And so what you're going to do for your second assignment for this week is to write out your script of exactly what you're going to say for this. And then you're going to use that script next week. Okay, you can practice it at home, so you can try to do it without even reading it, so you could feel really accomplished. But that's what your assignment is for next week. Okay, what you're hoping happens as a result is that they develop trust in you as the mediator, that they understand the process, that they know what your role is, and that they agree to follow their ground rules. That doesn't mean that they will. You have to keep reinforcing them, okay? That's the challenge of being a mediator. Any questions about this stage or this part of stage 1? Any questions at all? Okay, so that's the opening. Now we get into stage 2, which is talking to the mediators, and I call it storytelling. A lot of people call it storytelling because each person is telling how they perceive things. And, we are narrating animals that tell stories. And so that's one way of putting it. A lot of people use the word storytelling that are in the mediation field. Okay. Your goal is to keep developing rapport. You have hopefully by this point established a rapport with the people. Now you want them to also have some rapport with each other, but you also want to deepen the rapport with you because it's going to get tough now. Up until now, it wasn't that hard. It's going to start to increase in complexity, and it's going to increase in challenge. You want to understand what the issues are, and then you want to model good teamwork and good communication, and you want to prepare them to be able to do the problem solving and to come up with their solution. So I want to just go back here with this model your teamwork and good communication. I want you to take a look here. Okay. When you're going to be co-mediating, so next week, you're going to have 2 of you working together. When we start the class and you talk to each other for 5 minutes about how you're going to work together, you have to plan this out. Who's going to say what? How are you going to divide this up? By taking turns with this, you're going to establish how people take turns. So you are modeling cooperation. So figure out how you want to take turns with this, so that they see you modeling really good teamwork, okay? So when I say that model good teamwork, that's what that means. Now, when people start talking and telling their story, you can continue to try to have that teamwork. So you have one person ask one person, you can have the other person ask the other person, or you can just go back and forth. But you want to talk about that before, about how you're going to take turns, because it's a little bit tricky. So you're going to explain that this is a stage where they're going to talk to you. They're going to tell you what happened. Okay. You're going to pick someone to start. And this is really important, because if you just say, who wants to start? There could be a conflict. They could either say, I want to start, and the other person's like, no, I want to start. Or they could say, well, I'm not starting. Well, I'm not starting either. So to avoid a conflict, you pick someone. And what I do is I watch when I'm doing this part and I go through these ground rules. Is there one person that's having a harder time sitting still? Are they antsy? Are they interrupting? Are they more triggered? Are they more nervous? I will pick that person to start because that will help them settle down. If I can't tell who's more triggered, or I can't, if they're both equally triggered, then I just say, you know what? I always start with the person on my left, and for this stage, and then stage 2, I'm going to start with the person on my right. Okay. So, Charlie, you start. Tell me how you see the situation. What happened? Then they'll tell me. Okay. Um, they'll describe the events that led up to the meeting, and you're going to restate and clarify, reflect, and validate and reframe. So here you're going to use all your active listening skills, but here's the tricky part, okay? When this person's talking, the other person has to listen to them, and they're going to say things that the other person disagrees with. The other person's going to start getting triggered. And that's when the interruptions start. Like, no, that's not the way it happened. Or, yeah, but you did this, right? They're going to start it's hard for people to sit and listen because they're typically, their perspective is that the other person's wrong. So you can just expect that the other person's going to start getting triggered. So what you want to do here is you want to let this person talk, but you also want
already
to
ordered?
them,
No, I don't know
get
my
them
wallet.
through it.
Oh,
But I can order it online.
what the heck?
Hello? Okay, so you want to try to get them through it and tell their story and then restate it and then go to the other person as soon as you can so the other person doesn't feel like it's unbalanced and unfair. Get to the other person, and then once you get both of their stories out on the table, then you want to go back and forth to ask the clarifying questions to get really clear on the trip goals. And what's the key what do they want, what are they upset about, and you're trying to think about how you can set up the questions to allow them to do the problem solving. So this is where you use your trip analysis. So I actually get a piece of paper and make a grid, and I have I'm going to use Nicole and Charlie, right? Nicole, one column's Nicole, one column's Charlie. Then I put some lines through, and I have topic, relationship, identity, process, and I track the trip goals for each. And I look for what they might have in common, because that can help become a foundation for how to build an agreement, what they have in common. Okay. So you're going to have to listen really carefully. You take notes, you figure out what the conflict's about. Okay. And as I said, you note their topic, relationship, identity, and process issues, any understandings of the self that they have and the situation, and what their priorities are. So your tools for that are active listening. If I was a carpenter, okay, active listening is my hammer. It's what I keep on having to use constantly. Active listen, active listen. And that means like asking clarifying questions, reflecting back their feelings, validating them. You want to elevate them, make them feel like they're good people. What they did made sense given what the situation was, and then reframing, trying to put things into a positive framework, what their positive intentions were in the situation at all times. Okay. So that's what you're trying to do. And what you want the disputants to do is to describe their perspective and their concerns and their feelings. Okay. And this is really, really, really key here. They are listening to each other. They have a hard time listening to each other. They resist listening to each other, and they interrupt to stop listening to each other. So you have to model the listening, and you have to make sure that you keep going back and forth and giving them both turns so that they have an easier time listening. And by you validating, the other person hears that. They hear you validating and saying, yeah, that makes sense. I understand why you did that. That may be the first time that the other person actually heard why the other person did what they did and why the other person's upset. And the other person's behavior is going to make more sense to them. So you have to be a really good active listener and really do some clarifying and restating and validating so the other person can get it, get where the other disputant's coming from. Okay. Any questions on this stage? All right, when you get to the end of this stage, they may start repeating themselves. So I always ask a question, is there anything else you want me to know? And if they say no, then I move on. Okay. And then I will restate what their goals are. So this is a part where I restate or what sometimes it's called summarizing. What is it that people want and how can we then start working towards it? So you identify the short, medium, and the long-term goals. So maybe the long-term goal is to have a better relationship. The short-term goal is to solve the immediate problem. Okay. A person get paid back, get something fixed. Okay. Get some work done that they didn't get, whatever it is, the short term and the long run, have a better working relationship. Okay. All right. Now you're clarifying their interests and positions or trip goals. You are framing them in terms of present and future. So what do we do right now? How can we make sure this doesn't happen again in the future? And then framing the issues in terms of the fact that they're interdependent. So they realize that, they have a relationship and that's what needs to be transformed so that they can work together more effectively in the future. Okay. And you want to be constructive and collaborative in how you frame everything here. Okay. So this is usually actually pretty quick. I just put it out as a separate uh, a separate part of the stage to make sure you remember to do this. Okay. Now, once you're done with this, then you're moving to the hardest part of the whole process. Okay. This is where um, you can feel very uncomfortable because you're not sure what to do when you're the mediator. And I had a colleague who was actually he was a professor when I was still a student, and he said he described mediating as looking straight down the barrel of a loaded shotgun. That's what he felt like mediation was because people are upset. It's like a loaded gun there. And you have to be very skillful to manage what's happening in the room so that that gun doesn't go off, right? So in this stage, you're going to have people talking to each other. And that's when I feel like that metaphor, the loaded gun, actually is the most appropriate because when they're in the same room, I actually have them turn their chairs and face each other. And you could see like, they don't want to really do it, right? It's like, oh, I have to look at that other person, and I'm mad. And they'll turn their chairs partially, not fully. On Skype, it's easy because everyone's looking at each other, or on Zoom. But anyway, so this is tricky now because number one, because when they have to talk to each other, their anger may start to come up again or fear. Um, and it's tricky because you have to figure out what do I want them to
Yeah,
talk
maybe if
about?
you
Okay. What do I want them to talk about here? So you have to pick the issues for them to talk about. So it's really important that you have taken notes and then you got to go through and pick out what's a good thing for them to talk about here. All right. There's different, I've seen mediators use different approaches. Some people want to go for the big issue, the biggest issue, because they feel like once they have a breakthrough on the big issue, it becomes the other issues just kind of just get resolved like easily. They don't even have to think about it anymore. Other people want to go with the small issues because they can set up a process, a like a precedent of, oh, we solved that, good. Let's solve the next one. Let's solve the next one. Okay, so you have to make a judgment call. Um, I like to look at the relational issues because I feel like that's usually what's driving the conflict. So I'll pick something that has to do a relational issue, but I'll also give somebody a concrete event to talk about, and then I'll try to redirect them to keep talking about the actual behaviors that they observed, like trying to keep coach them to use I messages. So Yvonne or Beth, how did you feel when when Yvonne came in and just yelled at you in the cafeteria? What happened? What went on for you? What went on in your head? How did you feel at that moment? And then let her talk, um, and encourage them to talk about their feelings because that's what's really critical. Okay, after one person has expressed their concerns and their feelings about a particular issue, then I have the other person restate directly to the person who just spoke. I have them turn. So I would say, Yvonne, could you tell Beth how she felt when you came in and yelled at her? So what happens now is that Yvonne will say, well, uh, you know, she deserved it. Da-da-da. So they're not answering my question, right? They're going to start defending themselves. So you have to keep reminding them. You're gonna. I tell them, look, you're gonna have your chance to talk about what happened for you. Right now, we're just focusing on one person at a time, and I need you to just tell Beth what were her feelings when you confronted her in front of people. What did she feel? Okay. So it takes time. It takes time. But when people do it, there is something magical that happens by saying out of their own mouth what another person feels. It just creates empathy. It's like magic. And people tell me when they're in role plays, like, I can't believe how powerful that was. It's like when I thought that the person I was playing was totally right. And when I said what the other person felt, it totally changed my feeling about it. It was so powerful. Wow. And it's something that was unique to the program that I worked with. The person who created the process that we did, there were two people that actually created this process that were they were consultants for a company called Interaction Associates that's still in business. They're an international um, consulting company for corporations all over the world. They're very, very successful, and they've trained tons and tons of people in meeting facilitation. They wrote a book that was a bestseller called How to Make Meetings Work, and they came up with this process. And the process really works. Like I said, we had a 90% agreement rate. And what makes it work is that when people go through this, they develop empathy that they lacked, and they developed understanding, and they realize how their actions affected the other person and vice versa. Okay. So this takes time. This part of the process is the hardest part, and it's a part that takes the longest. There are times when people are just going to be so stubborn that no matter what you do, they're just not going to do it. And then if that happens, you'll say, all right, we're just going to have to move on then. Okay. You're never going to reach an understanding about this. So what can we do now then? How do you want to move forward so you can solve the problem? All right. I've never actually had to do this, but I know people that have had to do it. But everyone I know, and all the mediations I've been in, we've reached an understanding, and it could take a long time, but it happens. Okay. And it might not happen in one session. All right. But that's what you do. By the way, this is also something that a lot of family and couples therapists do as well. And they'll do this for a lot of the things that are happening in people's relationships, and get people to really understand each other and empathize. And then couples figure out how to solve their own problems just by having some empathy. So, but it's incredible how many people don't have empathy for each other, even if they've been married for 20 years, because they never listen to each other. They put up their walls. A metaphor I have for this is that when there's a conflict, people build a wall so that they don't listen to what the other person said. They're defending themselves against the other person. Okay. So what happens when they actually start listening to each other is it breaks down that wall. And that's how the understanding happens, is that the wall chips away. And once you get rid of that wall, then there's empathy, there's understanding. And that's how conflicts get resolved. This is not only true for interpersonal conflicts, this is even true for international conflicts. Okay, two presidents get together and there's a mediator in the room, and a war is ended. Okay, it's very powerful. This is what Jimmy Carter did when he brought Begin and Arafat in a room. Not Arafat, who was the president of Egypt. I don't remember, but anyway, if you're interested, read the book Getting to Yes, and read the story about how about Jimmy Carter, how he did this with two presidents, two leaders, international, two presidents of two countries at war with each other. Okay, this is incredible how it works. Jimmy Carter did it by having them talk about themselves and their families and so on. They met for like 3 days just talking about themselves and their families and what was important to them before they got to talking about how to end their war. Okay. But in mediation, we just focus on how people were affected in the conflict, and how to get moved to so that they understand how their actions impacted the other person and vice versa, and how the other person felt. Okay, so what happens is they will reflect on their own feelings and needs. So the people in it, they will feel greatly satisfied with the other person reflects back their feelings and their needs, they will, when they feel understood by the other person, it's amazing what that does to de-escalate negative feelings and being upset. Okay. They'll get to express their feelings. You have to facilitate them to use I language because they're not necessarily trained in it. A lot of people are not. So you have to ask questions. So I say things like, okay, could you talk about what you actually saw, and rather than put a label on it, what's the actual behaviors that you saw? So if that's, I try to get to the actions and the behaviors to get away from the judgmental angles. Like when people say, well, that was selfish, or they were dominating, or they were careless, like those kinds of things, like we don't know what that can mean, so many things. So you want to say, what was the behavior that you saw? What, if you had a video camera, what would you see? So that you can get clear on what the actions are. And then also focus on the feeling. What did you feel? And they'll say, well, you know, I feel he was an idiot. So you get back to, well, that's not a feeling. Tell me what you felt, what was going on inside. And then that helps to get the feelings out. Okay. All right. So if that happens, then they'll understand the other person's feelings as well as their own and their needs, and then you'll have an empathic understanding, which is the foundation for having a collaborative approach to solving the problem. Okay, so now once we get they're softened, they're listening, they're understanding each other. Sometimes they're even laughing. Then you could. I always ask before I move into the next stage. The last question I like to ask is, what new understandings did you have? What do you know now that you didn't know before we had this mediation today? And it's amazing what people say that they've learned from coming to mediation. It's like, well, I learned this, I learned that, I didn't realize that. Now I see why so and so was upset, right? What new understandings? Once you get to that, then you're ready to try to help them problem solve. So now you've kept a list and you have to document what's all the trip goals, what are they upset about, and so on, right? You kept track. And sometimes as they get to the end of this, they start throwing out ideas. Okay. And sometimes one person is like so magnanimous, it's like, you know what? I'm just going to do what you wanted to do. That's fine with me. And you have to make sure that's okay. But, yeah, we'll just do this, what you wanted all along, right? Sometimes the solutions just start coming out. Sometimes they have an understanding, but it's a complicated conflict and they don't know what to do. So what we do now is we use some of these techniques, and there could be more. Some of you have taken the I think it's called collaboration in teams class, and you might know more techniques, but here's some techniques that I know from mediation that work well. So the first one is just brainstorming, and that's just throwing out ideas without judging them. No evaluation, no judgment. Just write down all the ideas. If you have a flip chart or a whiteboard or a chalkboard, you write them up there or on a piece of paper, and so everyone can see them. Okay. And the rule for brainstorming is no judgment. You wait until you get all the ideas out, and then you start to look at them and evaluate them. Okay. Another technique is what's called fractionating. So you're breaking the problem down into the parts, and then you try to find a solution for each of the different parts. And that can make people feel successful that they figured out one part, and then you can move on to another part. Okay. Another one is called creating an ideal vision. So what you do is you ask people, okay, if this problem was solved and everything was going well, what would that look like? Okay, so they create an ideal vision, and then you try to work backwards and say, okay, how can we get to that? What needs to happen? So it's like you're going backwards to what would be okay, what's the first step to getting there? Or, what are the different steps? And then you can order them. Okay, so ideal vision is another way. And sometimes when you create the ideal vision, that stimulates people's thinking, and they puts them in a positive mood, and they start thinking of things they could do to get to that ideal vision. Okay. The next one is expanding the pie. So frequently when people are in a conflict, it's like they think of it as, oh, we have one slice of pie left, and now we have to divide it. And the only fair thing is to divide it in half. So expanding the pie is to increase what's there. So you might say, well, there's only one piece of pie, but you know what? There's a bunch of cookies in the cupboard and there's some ice cream. Let's bring all the desserts out there and get little pieces of everything, right? Or someone could say, hey, I'm going to run to the store and get another pie. Okay. Or, well, let's put our money together and go to Marie Callender's, right? So you're expanding the resources, and you could brainstorm to think of ways to bring in more resources or more possibilities. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a resource. Okay. And then bridging is when each party tries to bridge over to meet the other person's needs. So for example, let's say I want to go camping with one of my best friends and I want to go to the mountains and my friend wants to go to the beach. So what can I do to bridge? Okay. So I can say, hey, you know what? Let's go to Big Sur because there's a beach at Big Sur and there the mountains come right down to practically into the beach, right? So we could camp there and then we could spend some time at the beach and then we could go do some hiking because I like hiking in mountains because I like vistas. And so then we can hike and we could divide our time. And then the other person would need to reciprocate and say, okay, I'm willing to spend half the time hiking with you if we can go to the beach. So we're bridging towards each other to find an integrative solution to it. All right. Now let's say the person doesn't like cold water because it's definitely cold up there. Okay. Well, let's do it down in Southern California. Okay, maybe we can't in Southern California. The mountains don't come right down except for like Santa Monica, but there's not really good camping here. There is one beach campsite here, right? But it's not the greatest it's not backpacking. The mountains are pretty small around here, but that's another possibility. Okay, so you're looking to ways to try to meet the other person's needs and they try to meet your needs. So we're bridging towards each other to solve the problem. Okay, so those are some techniques. What you'll notice is not on here, it doesn't say anywhere that mediator suggests a solution. Okay, so you don't want to make the suggestions because it's not your problem and what you suggest might not work. And if you make a suggestion that doesn't work, that makes you look like you're incompetent. So if they ask you for solutions, you want to say, you know what? I'm not an expert in your problem. You're the expert in your problem. And if they like totally can't think of anything, you might say, well, why don't we take a break and go on Google and look for some ideas? Or let's break this week and come back next week. We did a really good job on understanding the problem. Take a break, relax, think, talk to some people, maybe some more ideas, and we'll get back together next week to try to see if you can come up with ideas. Okay. So you want to clearly differentiate yourself from being a consultant when you're a mediator. So you don't give people ideas. You are going to encourage them to come up with their own ideas. Okay. So what you're hoping is they generate new ideas, that they explore options, and that they're creative. So, and coming up with an option of doing research to come up with better ideas, that's an option. All right. So once they've done this, then the last part is deciding. So particularly if they brainstorm or come up with different options, then they're going to have to pick what's going to actually work. And you want to encourage that they pick things that both parties can commit to. And then you want to assist them. So I ask questions like, is that realistic? Is that going to work? Can you do that? You know, and the other thing I do is I also get each person to commit to their specific actions that they're going to take and only speak for themselves. Okay. So Charlie agrees to move to LA. Okay. So that we can then take turns having Henry at our house. All right. That's what Henry could do. Nicole agrees to work with Henry on a schedule that both of them can live with to share custody of the children, right? Each person says, I'm going to do this, as opposed to that person saying, well, you need to do that. Okay. Each person takes responsibility for their own actions. Okay. They might need to prioritize, and especially if some types of things are time sensitive and they want to do that first, or if sometimes one thing needs to happen before something else can happen, so you help them figure that stuff out. Okay. And you want to help them be integrated, so how can they meet everybody's needs here? All right. So you want them to evaluate what's realistic and what's the best ideas, and make their selections and think collaboratively and be realistic. I always do reality checks to make sure they can really do it, and they can do it within the time frame. And I like to put time frames on things so that people know when things are happening. Okay, so once they've made an agreement, you put it in writing and they sign it. Nowadays, people have laptops or they have a computer station, whatever, and they can type it up right away. We used to just write them out by hand and people sign them right then and there, and we make Xerox copies. Having a written document is really important because that makes people feel like it's very concrete and it's more and they're more committed to it. Okay, so be sure you put it in writing. and not just say, okay, that's great, now shake hands and that's it. No, you put it in writing and they sign it because that increases the level of commitment. So closure is to summarize the process. So you're assessing, you're writing in the agreement, and you're setting a date if they need another session. Okay. So you summarize the progress. So you want to really elevate them by saying, wow, we've come such a long way. We've come up with these new understandings. You're cooperating, you're working together. This is fantastic. You really, then you want to look if there's any changes. You've shifted your position. You decided you want to work together, whatever the changes are. And then you want to say, okay, here's what was decided, and emphasize their accomplishments, because you want to really show them what great work they did, because it's not easy. It is hard work to be a mediation. It's very hard work. I've been in 2 mediations myself. It is hard work where, it's my issues on the table, my conflict is hard. So you want to tell people, you want to congratulate people from doing it, working through it, and so on. Okay. If they need future meetings, you want to schedule them so that they know when they're going to come back. And then at the end, I always shake their hands, but I don't force them to shake hands. Some people will tell them to shake hands, and I think that's a bad idea. I think that you shake their hands, that models handshaking. So if they feel like shaking hands, they can. And sometimes they will, and sometimes they'll even hug, if they're depending on how close the relationship is. So you say goodbye, you shake hands, but you leave it up to them if they want to do it. Okay. Acknowledging yourself and others is what the disputants are doing. They acknowledge their own progress so they can feel like they had made an accomplishment and feel good about themselves. They'll be going over the agreement, and then they'll have any future meetings scheduled. Okay. So does anyone, I'm going to end this share. Does anyone have any questions about any of this? Because now you're going to do this next week. All right. Anyone have any questions?
No.
No? Okay.